Well, first of all, can I say what an honour it is? I'm going to step away from the mic because otherwise I'll blast you every so often. But can you hear me at the back? Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So what an honour it is to be here, and also celebrating Ada Lovelace Day. So I want to talk about sort of careers in science, the challenge. And I think we do have a challenge in the UK, and we have a challenge through most of the Western world. And we have a challenge getting women into STEM subjects, and I'll look at some of the statistics in a minute. But one of the problems is we have a challenge getting people into STEM in general. There is, STEM is seen as the economic booster. When countries go into recession, it's STEM they turn to. They want the entrepreneurs to come up with the new ideas. Manufacturing isn't the staple of the UK anymore. It's entrepreneurship and new ideas. And so we need more STEM practitioners to do that. So when I go out to schools, and in the last 6 years I've seen about 120,000 school kids, and I must admit I'm knackered. But when I go out to kids, I am trying to address everybody. Because I think to encourage more women to get into science, we need a societal change. We need to show that women doing science is quite a natural thing to do, and that science is accessible to all of us. And the truth is, there is a scientist in all of us. So that's what I'm trying to tap into. So, I think we live in incredibly exciting times. I mean, the fact that we've sort of understood the human genome, this is mind-boggling stuff. The idea that in the future we will actually have customised medicine for individual people. And I've got lots of aches and pains, so I'm very much looking forward to that day. But also, I was blown away about 5 years ago. I heard about synthetic biology. The idea of taking artificial DNA, putting it into living cells, and developing products. The fact that we can do this in this day and age is amazing. It's the stuff of science fiction coming down to real life. And more in my area, in the area of space and astronomy. We're doing fantastic things. We're getting bigger and better telescopes out there. We're looking further and further out into the universe. And what I particularly find incredible is exoplanets, planets going around other stars. We've probed the planets of our solar system, but now we're looking at other stars beyond our solar system, out in the galaxy, and looking at the planets going around those stars, and actually investigating perhaps the potential of life on those planets. So science is amazing. Science is in the news headlines all the time. So it seems quite bizarre that there aren't more science practitioners. Now, this is a bit of old data taken by the Royal Society, but it shows the trends in sort of scientific research, in R&D, and countries across the world are seeing the importance of R&D and investing more and more in it. So with this trend, we need more scientists, we need more engineers. Yeah, looking at sort of the actually bang for your buck, looking at the Genome Project, for every $141 that went into the Genome Project, for every $1 that went into the Genome Project, we've got at least $141 coming out. And that is increasing all the time. So it's worth investing in science. But when you look at the numbers, we still have some problem areas, let's put it that way. If you look at sort of medicine, medicine is about sort of 65 to sort of 34. There are more women going into medicine than men. I think this is an amazing statistic. Because if you go back 150 years, 200 years ago, how many women were actually working in medicine? So if you can make that difference in that sort of timescale, that means there's hope for the future. But we need that hope for the future. Because if you go down to the biological sciences, it's about 50-50. But by the time you get down to the natural sciences, the ratios are getting sort of quite severe now. We're talking about 30% women to 70% men. And by the time you get down to engineering, it's 10% women compared to 90% men. So as a female engineer, I'm pretty rare. But we need more, and that's the challenge. So when we start looking into it, why do so few girls think about taking physics, think about going into engineering? And to me, I think part of the problem is PR. And this video was made a few years ago asking girls why they don't actually take up physics. And this is the
It's more of a boys' subject. So if I get this GCSE in physics, what am I going to do with it?
Right, come on guys, we go this.
Why do so few girls choose to study physics post-16? Physicists and educationists have come up with many theories, but what do the girls themselves have to say?
I don't really think it's very relevant when you get out of school.
If there was something that seems like you could do something in the future that to do with physics, and it would be like better and more interesting, but because you can only really think of being a physics teacher, I can't think of anything else.
Okay.
We thought it was like quite strange that no women have actually like taken physics that far to become really well known. It's only men that have become famous sort of from it and say we have like less chance, so there's no point trying.
There's always that letdown that no one will ever accept you, like, trying to go that far just because you're a woman.
Now, every time I see that video, and I've seen it many, many times, it makes me want to weep. A number of things said there. If you study physics, you can only become a physics teacher. Ah! I don't know how many physicists in the room there are, but that is just so wrong. And this is why I'm saying it needs to be a PR campaign. Because the problem with physics is, if you look at people studying medicine, most people interact with doctors, medical doctors in their everyday lives. You go to the doctor, you go to your GP, you might go to a hospital. People can see a career progression in medicine. You study medicine, you become a doctor, people know what they do. Similar with accountancy, okay? You study accountancy, you'll end up in an office, you'll be auditing people. People can see a career path. The wonderful thing about physics is the study of absolutely everything. From the furthest reaches of the universe to the smallest particles known to people today. And it covers everything else in between. And the problem is, most interactions that people actually visibly see is their physics teacher. So they think, physics equates to being teaching in physics. Nothing wrong with teaching in physics, but there's a whole smorgasbord of other jobs that are available. But the problem is, we're just not selling it. We need to get out there and show kids what you can do with a career in science. So over the last, 6, 7 years, that's just what I've been doing. Because I was working as a space scientist at sort of a large industrial company, Aderin Limited, third largest space company in the world. And I was working on big projects, putting applications into the European Space Agency for projects worth maybe sort of 15 million euros. And I was thinking, I'm a space scientist, that's pretty cool. Space scientist is up there with brain surgeon. But my problem is, when I actually put recruitment ads in the newspapers, in the trade journals, I wasn't getting anyone responding. And so I thought, I've got to do something about this. I'm going to go out there and sell science to people. I want to show them the amazing things you can do with a career in science. So first of all, I want to show them various role models, but especially to the girls. Because if you saw in that video, they sort of panned across the wall in the classroom, and they had the great and the good, Newton, all the great and the good of science, but they had Professor Bunsen from the Muppets, and yet they didn't have one woman up on the wall. So let's start with that. Let's get some role models out there showing that women have been doing science for a long time and they've been doing it very well. Okay, my next prong in my attack, relevance. You study physics, you become a physics teacher. So wrong. Even though I've just shown them snapshots of my career, I've done a variety of different jobs using that physics basis that I got as a child and I got at university to do a smorgasbord of different things. So let's take them on a journey through my career and through others' careers to show them the wide diversity of things you can do with physics. But the thing I think we've got working for us, the best weapon we've got of all, is wonder. It's the wonder of science. Science is transforming our lives. It might be science, it might be engineering, but it's changing the world around us. I work as a space scientist. We've only been out in space for about 60 years, but I made a film a little while ago looking at the satellites, and in the first sort of half an hour of my day, I had actually interacted with 40 satellites, and I wasn't even aware of it. So science is transforming our lives. I mentioned exoplanets, planets going around other stars. We now have the ability to detect these and monitor them and actually look at them in detail. The genome, everything, we have that sense of wonder. And as science students and engineering students, you'll know that sense of wonder. And we need to get out there and share it as widely as possible. So, to celebrate International Year of Astronomy, probably 5 or 6 years ago, we actually dug back in time and tried to work out who were the prominent female astronomers of the past. And we came up with quite a wide range of people. One of the first people we came up with was this amazing woman, chief astronomer and priestess of the moon goddess of the city of Babylon. Pretty cool title. I wouldn't mind that one. And she had an amazing, powerful position in the city of Babylon. So it's one of the sort of dignitaries of the city of Babylon. And we found also some amazing pictures of her. This is sort of a bust. But we also found this image of her as well, which we found a bit puzzling. Because we looked at this image, and it does appear she's wearing a false beard. And we did some more investigation, and it turned out that whenever she was addressing her male colleagues, she used to have to don a false beard. Now, I do the Sky at Night television programme every month. It's been running for 57 years. And I'm very fortunately, I don't actually have to wear a beard anymore. So okay, it's taken 4,000 years, but we have progressed, and we need to keep on progressing. Hypatia of Alexander, an amazing woman, sort of raised by her father to be the perfect human, and one of the very first science communicators. She used to stand on the temple wall telling people about astronomy and all the things that they had discovered and sort of sharing that with the public. She was, again, very well received and very popular. but she came to a rather nasty end. I think she was dashed to pieces. She just got too powerful, and she was dashed to pieces at the gates of the temple. Now, you might wonder why I mention her, because it doesn't sound like a very happy story. But I do because of this quote, and it's this: reserve your right to think, for even to think wrongly is better than not thinking at all. And to me, this just sort of sums it up. As scientists, as engineers, we use our brain power, and our brain power has the capability of changing worlds. And yet, when I go out to schools and I speak to kids, we're almost not teaching them to think anymore. We're teaching them to pass exams, and that's not the right solution. So I think we need to reserve our right to think, because it is a right that we all have, and a right we should all be celebrating. Now, I mentioned Alexander, but I think that brings me wonderfully on to Ada Lovelace, not an astronomer, but again, she was brought up by her mother to be sort of a very perfect, logical woman. Her father was Byron, the mad poet. So I think her mother wanted to contain her and keep her sort of very much on the straight and narrow. So she was very much ingratiated in sort of mathematics and understanding that. And she went on to do amazing work. She published, she was working on the analytical engine with Babbage. And Babbage refers to her with great warmth and saying what an amazing knowledge she had of mathematics. She also published the first detailed programs that computers can use. Babbage came up with some ideas of what computers can do and some very sort of top-level programming. But she went into a lot of detail, so much so that her work was used by Turing in sort of the 1940s when the first computers were being developed. So again, an amazing woman, she again should be a poster girl up on our walls. Now, in terms of poster girls, you can't get much better than Marie Curie. Now, only 4 people in the world have won more than one Nobel Prize. They've won 2 Nobel Prizes. And Marie Curie won her Nobel Prizes for chemistry and physics. I mean, whoa. And also, she did this in sort of the 19th century, where women weren't that prominent. So what an amazing woman. Why wasn't she up on that wall in the school? But I also think that we need to be careful with our role models. Because a few years ago, someone came up and said, "Maggie, you're such a role model." And I said, I laughed, because I don't see myself as a role model, or I didn't. Because I know what I'm really like. I'm pathologically late, as demonstrated. I'm incredibly untidy. You should see my bedroom at the moment. And I just felt I can't be a role model, because I'm not like her. I'm not the great and the good and the shiny. I'm just me. But what I realised is I made a mistake, because the fact is, each and every one of us in this room is a role model. And to be a role model, you don't have to be great, you don't have to be the good, you don't have to be the perfect. You just have to have something to share. And the thing I've got to share is I just love talking to people about science. You should see the poor taxi driver. She was just quite glad to get rid of me. And there's exoplanets as well. Planets going round other stars. Hold it, I can tell you more. As I get thrown out of the taxi. That's what I love to do. So that's my shiny bit. That's the bit I've got to share with everybody. But each and every one of us in this room has something to share with people. It might be about science. It might be about anything. It doesn't matter. That makes us all role models, and we make the world a better place if we all go out there and share our shiny bits. Sounds slightly rude. Okay. Mentioning Marie Curie, I mean, she really was sort of the pin-up. She really was sort of someone I used to put on a pedestal. But she was very human at the same time. She actually went on to have 2 kids, and one of her kids went on to have win a Nobel Prize as well. So she had a bit of a dynasty thing going on. But also, I found out quite recently that she used to write some sort of fairly saucy letters to a fellow scientist. And there was a scandal in Paris because she was doing this. It's like the tabloid press having a go. To me, that didn't diminish her. It just made her more human. It made her more accessible. Good old Maria, off you go. It just made her sort of more human. And I think that's what role models need to be. If we put them on pedestals and make them too shiny, then we can't aspire to be them. If we make them human and show them that they're just like everyday people like you and me, then we can aspire to be them. And moving on, another fantastic role model that should have been on the wall, and a living role model, which I think is very important. Jocelyn Bell Brunel, a fantastic astronomer. You can see actually one of her radio telescopes in the background. She did some work in radio astronomy as a student at Cambridge. And one of the things she detected was an amazing signal. It was a signal that went beep, 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 beep. Now, as an astronomer, if you get a signal like that, usually you go and say, okay, who's got the microwave on? Because it feels as if it's a signal coming from Earth. If you've got something that frequent and that regular, it sounds as if it's earthbound. So she looked at it and she analysed it, and she really looked, and it was coming from space. So she took this, the result to her supervisor and said, hey, I found this, and I don't know what it means, but we found it coming from space. And her supervisor was a bit laid back. What are you trying to say, Jocelyn? Have you found little green men? And he was a bit disparaging about her work. But Jocelyn, and that's what I love about her, she's a determined woman. And she turned around and said, okay, I've only got one example of this. If I want to prove it's true, I need more examples. So she went out and found multiple examples out there. And then within the group, they worked out what these things are. And these things are amazing. They're called pulsars. And what you do is you take something about the size of our sun, well, let's say about 1.5 times the size of our sun, and stars go through life cycles. So they're born, they shine, and then they sort of collapse in their old age. So what these stars, which are sort of slightly bigger than our sun, when they collapse into something called a pulsar. And that's taking something the size and the mass of the sun, and you shrink it down to something about the size of Sheffield. And I heard Jocelyn describing it the other day. This is a super dense structure. And it's like taking the population of planet Earth, taking a thimble and putting each member of planet Earth into the thimble. That's the sort of density we're talking about in a pulsar. And why we get these signals is because these pulsars are incredibly dense and they're spinning very fast in space, many times a second. And they throw out radio waves, beams of radio waves. And each time one of those beams of radio waves sweeps past planet Earth, we detect it as a signal. So that's what she had found, the pulsar. Now, it turns out that, unfortunately, her supervisor went on to win the Nobel Prize, and Jocelyn didn't actually get the Nobel Prize. Now, the thing is, I always admire her, because if that was me, I would be bitter and twisted. I'd be sitting there in the pub, and that Nobel Prize should have been mine. But to hear Jocelyn, she's not like that at all. She says, I was a student. They didn't give Nobel Prizes to students. And also, if I had got the Nobel Prize at that age, what would I have gone on to? If you get that early on in your career, you can't give her another prize. She's got a Nobel Prize. She doesn't want anything else. But instead, she's gone on to have a fruitful career. She was the president of the Institute of Physics for many years. She's gone on and had a really happy life. Me, I'd be bitter and twisted. But Jocelyn, I take my hat off to her. And again, a fantastic role model we should be celebrating. So when we go out to schools and they have pictures of the Muppets on the wall, this is the sort of image I'd like to see. This is an image taken for the International Year of Astronomy a few years ago. And I just love the bump of her belly and the bump of her vacuum chamber. These are real women doing real science. She's studying the life in the universe, a very emotive caption. So this is what we need our kids to be seeing. Women doing science and doing it amazingly. So, that's a superwoman point. Role models don't have to be superhumans. But some people say to me, well, why do we need women in engineering and science? I mean, we've been getting on quite well so far. Well, I think it is incredibly important because science is transforming women's lives in so many different ways. I mean, from something as simple as the contraceptive pill in the 1960s, that gave women power over their own fertility. Something as simple as the tampon, a sort of engineering marvel, but sort of very useful for women. The refrigerator. It sounds ridiculous, but a refrigerator transforms people's lives. And before the refrigerator, women had to go, it was generally women, went shopping every day, collecting the perishables. Now we don't have to do that. And something as simple as running water transforms the lives of women. Oops. Sorry, I wasn't expecting that one. There's a really horrible statistic that says that in a day, there are, I think it's 400 million work hours spent by women gathering water for their families. And that's the equivalent of building 28 Empire State Buildings every day. Now, I love, I've got a 5-year-old daughter, and I love cartoons, and so we watched Jungle Book together. And at the very end of Jungle Book, there's this wonderful song, because there's this beautiful girl, and she comes down to the river, and she's sort of gathering water for her family, and she sings a song about, my father is out hunting, my mother is at home cooking, and my lot in the family is, I gather water for the family. And she sings it sort of beautifully, and she goes off, and Mowgli, the young boy, follows her into the man village. But the thing is, I love the song, and it's beautiful, but at the same time I think, wouldn't you prefer to be building an Empire State Building? Rather than gathering water, with a good extensive pipe work, we can release the women from sort of these drudgery tasks and get them doing really exciting things and reaching their full potential. One of the other things I mentioned is relevance. We have role models, but we also need relevance. And so I'd just like to show you a few snapshots from my career. I did my degree in physics at Imperial. I did my PhD in mechanical engineering. And then when I came out of university, there was a credit crunch, and I couldn't find a job anywhere. And eventually, after some convolutions, I actually got a job with the Ministry of Defence. Now, I found this a bit scary, because I went to the job interview at the Ministry of Defence, and I said, okay, thank you, well, what would I be doing in my work? And they said, we can't tell you, because you haven't signed the Official Secrets Act. But eventually I found out what I would be doing, and I was making a missile warning system, flying around in aeroplanes, gathering data on what missiles look like, so we could actually put a missile warning system on an aeroplane and protect the pilots that are in the aircraft. But then I made an active decision and got a promotion, and I started working on landmines. Landmines are a devastating problem across the world. There's a horrible United Nations statistic that if you look at all the landmines spread across the world, if we actually want to clear them at the current rate of clearance, it's going to take over 1,000 years to get rid of the last landmine that's out there at the moment. And landmines are just such a useful deployment tool. You throw landmines, you scatter them in a field, the first few people will go into the field, they'll get their limbs blown off, and we've actually seen this sort of quite graphically, and people won't enter the field again. But the problem is, after the war is finished, the landmines are still there. So I went out to Cambodia and met some of the people who've felt the atrocities of landmines. And we were trying to develop a new technique. Generally, people use sort of sticks to detect, but that is incredibly slow and very dangerous. You can also use metal detection. But if you see the landmines at the top, they're plastic landmines. They have very, very little metal content. So when you tune your metal detector up to detect the little metal content in that, you also pick up all the false alarms, the nuts, the bolts, the Coke cans that are left out there. So we were trying to develop new technology using something called ground penetrating radar, where we actually send radar signals, radio waves, towards the ground. Most of it gets reflected off, but a few of those radio waves penetrate below the surface, and you can actually see what's below the surface. Actually, ground penetrating radar is often used to find dead bodies, but I'll leave that to one side for now. We were also developing a new technique called nuclear quadrupole resonance, where you're actually exciting the nucleus of a nitrogen atom within a molecule, and by the radio frequencies that excite that nucleus, you're going to actually work out if there are explosive content there. So using different techniques. But when I go out to schools, I like to show you these images. They're quite graphic and quite emotive, but I like to show that science is wonderful, engineering is fantastic, but it can be used for good things, and it can be used for devastation. And so, as a responsibility, everybody needs to actually have an understanding of science. When I go out to schools, I don't just want to make the next generation of scientists. I want to make a public awareness of science, because science can be used for great things, but science can be used for devastation. And it's generally up to the public to decide which way that goes. And if they don't have an understanding, like the landmine problem, there's a moratorium against landmines now, mainly because the public rose up and said, we don't want this used anymore. So if you don't have an awareness of it, how can we make the choices? Oh, what's that doing there? Okay, that's the Empire State Building. So we have some other fantastic role models out there. This is a girl called Emily Cummings. She actually won Young Engineer of Britain a few years ago. And what she did is she came up with, she was in her grandfather's garage. She put some sort of various bits and pieces of rubbish together and made a small refrigeration unit. And she's gone on to set up a company, and she's actually getting people to make these refrigeration units in the developing world. I've got another woman here, Jessica, and she was another winner of Young Engineer of Britain. And what she came up with was a fibre optic method of looking at when women are having contractions. In the developing world, again, women don't always know when they are heavily in labour. With this device, they could actually measure the strength of their contractions and their frequency of their contractions and work out if they need to go along to the hospital or stay at home. So women, tackling women's problems and seeing it from our point of view. So what I also like to do is try and tell people why I became a scientist, how I became a scientist, and fundamentally what I do as a scientist. Now, the reason I became a scientist is because of these guys. I don't know if anyone knows who these are. These are actually the Clangers. You're probably all far, far too young. But as a child, I used to watch the Clangers on BBC television, and they were these little creatures that lived out in space, and I was mesmerised by them. I just wanted to go and visit the Clangers. As a 3-year-old, I decided that I was going to get out into space and visit the Clangers. That's the reason I became a space scientist. Now, dreams can come true, because recently the BBC brought the Clangers back to BBC television, and I actually made a video with the Clangers. And one of the Clangers, they speak in little whistles, and one of the Clangers looked up and said, "Hello, Maggie." And I must admit, I cried, because there was a 3-year-old girl inside of me saying, "Oh, I've met the Clangers." So dreams can come true. And it also shows that sometimes the really simple things can make a really big change in people's career decisions. Now, I mentioned that I think selling science and engineering is a PR job, and I think this video sums up part of the challenge with that PR job.
I'm worried about little Dilbert. He's not like other kids.
What do you mean?
Yesterday, I left him alone for a minute, and he disassembled the TV, our clock, and the stereo.
That's perfectly normal. Kids take things apart.
Oh, the part that that worries me is he used the components to build a ham radio set.
Oh dear.
Is that bad?
Normally I'd want to run an EEG on him, but the machine isn't working. It's worse than I feared.
What is it?
I'm afraid your son has the knack.
The knack?
The knack. It's a rare condition characterized by an extreme intuition about all things mechanical and electrical, and utter social ineptitude.
Can he lead a normal life?
No. He'll be an engineer.
And so, as the mother's sobs die in the background, because I mean, there's a few great lines in there, you know, total social ineptitude, no, he'll be an engineer. And the thing is, I think lots has happened to sort of move away from this sort of a nerdy image of scientists and engineers, but it's still there. And it's quite interesting because the facts verify this. If you look at girls as sort of taking up STEM subjects, when I first started going out and doing science communication, I thought I'll go to the girls' schools, I'll fire them up, hopefully they'll go on and have a career in science. But I realised I was taking it wrong. It's actually in the mixed schools that girls are much less likely to take up science and engineering. And the thing is, it's a part of a timing problem. Because the time you actually have to make these decisions about what you're going to do in your career is the time when your hormones are running rife. And you're trying to look pretty and sort of accessible to the other sex. And that's the last thing you want to do is appear to be a nerd. And so many girls are doing better than the boys at GCSE, but they don't go on to do the A-level because they see it as nerdish. So it is really a PR problem, but it's a PR problem that we can solve together. Because if us scientists and engineers go out and show how cool and suave we are, we can actually try and move away from this sort of a nerdy image of scientists and engineers. So the traditional view of a scientist is very much a sort of a white, a sort of male, someone who looks very, very serious. Because when you speak to kids, when they think of a scientist, they think of someone, with sort of a brain the size of a small planet, thinking deep thoughts all the time. They have no time for fun and games. They're thinking really serious thoughts. Another stereotypical image we have of a scientist is, of course, Albert Einstein, the granddaddy of modern physics. And the thing is, you often see this sort of scientist portrayed in films, in James Bond films. Mr. Bond, I'm going to take over the world and turn it into jam. The mad scientist. Well, I know, I am a bit of the mad scientist, but we see them in films all the time. So when I go out to schools, I also like to show them images like this. This is a picture of me and my husband on our wedding day, and I'm wearing a wedding dress I designed myself. And I say to the younger kids, spot the scientist. They usually automatically go for my husband because he fits into that stereotypical image. He's white, he's male. Okay, he's not looking serious here, but that's what people expect a scientist to look like. But I like to say that I met my husband at Imperial College. That's where we met, and he's dyslexic like me, and neither of us have the brain of the size of a small planet. But what got us interested in science was being inquisitive. We ask why. And that's the key to being a scientist. It's just simply asking why. And you see it in young kids. My daughter, we have a rule at home, 5 whys and you're out. Because she'll just do it, why is the sky blue? And I'll give her an explanation, but why is that? And why is that? No, 5 whys and you're out, that's enough. But somehow, as kids go through the school system, they stop asking why. They might know how to pass exams, but they stop thinking. So that's the key to being a scientist. And the truth is, there's a scientist in every single one of us, and all we need to do is unleash it. So, I've had a variety of different jobs. I've worked on landmine detectors, missile warning systems. I've been very lucky. Anti-personnel ones. Okay, this is I'm repeating myself. But one of my favourite jobs by far was working here. This really gives me the sense of wonder. When I was about 15 years old, I made my own telescope. I bought a telescope from Argos, and it was plastic lenses, and it was useless. I discovered a telescope making class, so I went and ground and polished my own mirror. And it was fantastic. I mean, it took months to do, but eventually I had a spherical mirror, and I was able to work the surface and make it into a sort of a parabolic mirror. And a parabola is a great shape for bringing light to a nice tight focus. And then I could buy a flat mirror, put it together in a nice light tight box, and I had my own telescope. And you can't imagine my excitement. I was brought up in Camden, sort of down the road, so light pollution in London is not good. But the first night I took out my telescope, pointed it up at the night sky, and suddenly the craters of the moon leapt out of me. And so this was something I'd made with my own hands. But I've since gone on to work at one of the biggest telescopes in the world. This is the Gemini telescope, an 8-metre telescope, 8 metres of light gathering power. And it's like a cathedral to science. It's amazing. This is the primary mirror of the telescope, 8 meters of light-gathering power. And but usually when people think of a telescope, people think of, say, someone looking through an eyepiece. But with a telescope this big, you just can't do that. There's just too much light. So instead, we built instrumentation. And I spent about 3 years of my life in a basement at UCL making this. BHROS, the bench-mounted high-resolution optical spectrograph. Snappy, huh? But BHROS did something simple. It took the light gathered by that huge telescope. By fibre optics, it was fed down to BHROS. And then from that light, we generated this, a star spectra. And by analysing a star spectra, we can actually look into the heart of stars. Each one of those black lines represents an absorption band, light that has been absorbed by a chemical between us and the star, or by a chemical within the star. And so by analysing those lines, we can actually see what is burning in a star, what chemical reactions are taking place in the heart of a star. And also by looking at some of the lines, we can actually see if the star is moving towards us or away from us. So by sitting on Earth and looking out into space, we can tell all sorts of things about what's going on out there. And our ideas of the solar system have evolved and been transformed. One of the things that I really find quite interesting is when I go out to schools and speak to school kids about physics, they get the impression that, it's all pretty much done and dusted. I mean, you've been doing physics for a while, you've got all the answers. How wrong they are. Ideas evolve. The fact that we don't know what 94% of the universe is made, I find a bit embarrassing as a physicist. We don't know what it is. We give it names like dark matter and dark energy, but we don't know what it's made for. There's plenty more good pickings for the next generation to come and help us solve. And ideas in science evolve. It's not a static thing. We used to think that the Earth was the centre of the universe. Then we came up with the heliocentric, the sun-centred universe. And now we use instruments in space to look down through the atmosphere or up into space and tell us all sorts of things. This is an image of the electromagnetic spectrum. And different parts of the electromagnetic spectrum don't actually penetrate through the Earth's atmosphere. So we can build wonderful ground-based telescopes, but they have to be mainly in the radio waves or in the visible light waves, because that's the sort of thing we can detect from planet Earth. We build space telescopes to get a much bigger picture of the universe. And for the kids, I always like to compare it with a picture by Van Gogh called Starry Night. If you look at the picture and break it down into its component colours, you can see the yellows, the blues, the yellows, the greens. It's not until you put all those different colours together that you get the complete picture. And it's exactly the same with our images of the universe. If you look at the sun in the visible light, it's okay, but it's a bit boring. This is a H-alpha filter, so a very narrow band of visible light. You see a few sunspots, but you don't see much else. But now look at the sun in X-rays, UV, extreme UV, radio waves. It's not until you put all those images together that you get a much more dynamic view of our sun. And that's just what we're doing with space science. We're looking at different bands of the electromagnetic spectrum, putting those images together and getting a much more complete picture of our universe. So now, from the sun-centered, the Earth-centered universe, we now know that our sun is one of 200 billion stars that orbits a supermassive black hole at the center of our galaxy. And now, of those 200 billion stars, what we're doing is we're actually seeing exoplanets, planets going around other stars. Now, detecting an exoplanet is hard work. You can just about see a star at this distance, but a planet going around a star is actually invisible from this distance. By using various techniques, looking at how a star wobbles as a planet goes around it, we can actually detect these exoplanets. But what boggles my mind recently is now we're actually detecting the atmospheres of exoplanets. We're detecting the atmospheres of something we can't actually see. And we do it very simply. As an exoplanet goes around a star, we can see the light coming from the star, and we can get a spectrum of the light coming from the star. But as the exoplanet goes in front of the star, or between us and the star, a small percentage of light actually travels through the atmosphere of that exoplanet. And we can actually look at shifts in the spectrum and work out what chemicals are in the atmosphere of an exoplanet. This exoplanet might be light years away from us, and yet we can detect those atmospheres. And if we could do that, we could potentially find life out there in the universe. There are chemicals that we've created artificially here on Earth, and they sit in our atmosphere. If we actually detect chemicals like that on another planet, then we're pretty convinced that there'll be intelligent life out there. So we have within our means the ways of detecting life in the universe. Just to end my talk, I'd like to talk about this picture. This is an image called the Hubble Deep Field. And space and astronomy is transforming our knowledge of ourselves and of the universe. The Hubble Space Telescope was commissioned to do something very strange a few years ago. It looked at a piece of space which we thought was empty. We didn't think there were any stars there. But what it did is it looked at that piece of empty space at 10 whole days to get a really long exposure. If you get a long exposure, you get more light coming in and you can see what's out there. And when we did this long exposure, this is what we saw. We saw galaxies from the very early universe. Astronomy is a time machine. The further you look out, the further back in time you go. If you actually see the sun shining, what we see from the sun is actually how the sun was 9 minutes ago, because it's taken the light 9 minutes to travel from the sun to us. So when you look further and further into space, you're looking further and further back in time. So what the Hubble Deep Field revealed was these galaxies from the very early universe. But it also gave us another piece of information. We live in a galaxy called the Milky Way. It contains 200 billion stars. Each one of those stars is a sun like our sun, some bigger, some smaller, but effectively a sun like our sun. What the Hubble Deep Field showed us is that in the whole of the universe, there are approximately 100 billion galaxies. Our galaxy, the Milky Way, just 200 billion stars. Some of the galaxies will be bigger, some of the galaxies will be smaller, but 100 billion galaxies. This is the stuff of mind-boggling. And I like to show kids and end up with this image because I think it puts us into perspective. As part of my work, I travel around the world. I go to all sorts of places. I love to travel and see different cultures. But sometimes when you look at the human race, it just seems bizarre because we will find any reason to argue. It might be colour of skin, it might be gender, it might be religion, but we always find some way of arguing. But when you put it in the perspective of the universe, it's like bacteria arguing over a sugar solution. It's ridiculous. So my motto is make more rockets and less war, because I think that is a solution that can help us all. Thank you very much for listening.